This video is brought to you by the 3 Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to the special Arkham Horror the Card Game video from 3 Minute Board Games. In this video I'm going to run through the official campaigns in my order from least preferred to most preferred. I'm going to give you my pros and cons of each campaign and why I rank them where I rank them. One of the driving reasons for doing this is I've recently finished all of the campaigns. I've played them all through. But also, Arkham's heading into a new era. And the new campaign structure and the new way the game's going, these campaigns are going to be sort of their own thing. They're almost like a first edition and we're heading into a second edition of the game, or a second era of the game. So I thought this was the perfect cutoff point to rank the campaigns that have been published, and that way, looking forward, we can look at the new stuff in isolation from these particular campaigns. The Night of the Zealot campaign isn't in this ranking. I think of it as a 2-part tutorial and a 3rd part that doesn't exist. And it's not really fair to measure it up against the other campaigns that they've done full box sets for. Now, as always, this is my opinion. If you have a different opinion on Arkham Horror the Card Game, that's fantastic. Let's talk about those differences of opinions in the comments below. Anyway, let's kick off with my least favourite campaign. It was supposed to be one last job at the behest of a shadowy antiquarian, Randall Tillinghast, who presents an offer you can't refuse. You and your fellow investigators travel to the South Pacific and its vast alien city of Rilia. However, the more you explore, the more terrors you discover. And as a looming sense of dread grows, you find yourself and all of Arkham faced with a colossal threat. The time has come, Cthulhu has awakened, and Arkham will never be the same. So overall, I didn't rate the Drowned City particularly highly. It does have some positives though. The opening scenario is really good. I like the whole idea of it, of you being stuck between two warring gangs. It was a really fun scenario, and I really like its Arkham City roots. Overall, the scenarios in this campaign box are quite robust and they are quite good. That's from a purely mechanical point of view. None of them seem particularly unfair or unreasonable, and they don't tend to throw you a lot of design curveballs. They might not blow your socks off with their creativity, but they do the fundamentals really well. Another interesting feature about the Drowned City is that most of the scenarios are easy to complete their core objective. If you're just doing the basic thing you need to win the scenario, most of them are pretty straightforward. Where the challenge comes here is getting the extra victory points off locations and the extra glyphs and all of the artifacts. There's like a laundry list of things you can do in most scenarios, and win the scenario is the first one of them. And you can be in position to do that pretty early on, but still want to check off all of the other things you need to do before ending the scenario. And I think that's quite cool design, because it means if you're not particularly comfortable with Arkham, you can just shoot for the basic objective. And if you want to push yourself, well, you try to do absolutely everything. The biggest downside of the campaign is its structure and its narrative for me. You go straight from a gang fight in Arkham immediately to Rilia. A second scenario, and from that point on, you're in Rilia for another 5 or 6 scenarios. To me, Rilia feels like an end of campaign payoff, not the place you set an entire campaign. And because of that, and the sheer number of scenarios you spend in Rilia going back and forth between spooky tunnels and ancient mausoleums and things that are filling with water, it overexposes Rilia. It takes something that should feel mystical and weird and unique and makes it feel mundane by the end of one playthrough. The NPCs you interact with as well just treat this entirely alien city that you spend an inordinate amount of time in just like it's a fun day at the beach. And that really takes me out of the campaign, just how lackadaisical everyone is about the nature of what you're doing in this campaign. I also didn't care much for the finale. The idea of a showdown with Cthulhu was pretty cool and all, and having him trash Arkham seems like a neat idea at the time, but playing the scenario, it was a bit of a letdown. But you'll see through this list that Arkham finales tend to be a bit of a letdown. It's a bit of a recurring theme. Tasks are a thing that are introduced in this campaign. Each character is given a task after the first scenario, and for the scenarios in Rilia, they're an extra thing you need to do. And I just found them to be busy work, for the sake of busy work. The way these scenarios are structured, how you've got the laundry list of extra tasks you can do, and this is just an extra task. And I don't think any of the tasks in and of themselves are interesting things to be doing. And my final con about the campaign, which might be a plus for an awful lot of people, is it hands out XP like a fire hose. I can't remember the amount of XP we had going into the final scenario, but it was 60 or 70 or something. It was a crazy amount of XP. Every one of the scenarios is giving out 7 to 9 XP. if you manage to get all of the bonus victory points. And that is so much. Like, I get that some people have a power fantasy around deck building, and giving them 200 XP, they could probably find a way to spend that. But for me, I felt like by about the 5th scenario, I had everything I could possibly want in the deck. And from that point on, the upgrades felt meaningless. And it's one of those things where too much of a good thing can lead to an intensely unsatisfying feeling, like it wasn't earned, or that you've hacked the game in some way. The best thing about this campaign, oddly enough, wasn't part of the campaign. It was a standalone Mansions of Madness scenario. And I thought that was a cool idea, to have a scenario in another game that you can go play that has a different perspective on the final events. It did a little bit of extra storytelling that made the campaign feel a little bit more complete than I imagine most other people felt when they finished it. Why is the Drowned City worth getting? Well, as I said, it does have pretty good, robust scenarios. And there are scenarios that you can play and sort of manage to your own difficulty level. Looking for a campaign that has reasonably strong scenario design overall, and you don't really care about the narrative or the fact that Relia is massively overexposed, then the Drowned City could be really good for you. There is a hidden realm outside the world of the waking, a realm of whimsy, imagination, and nightmares. After occult author Virgil Grey writes about his adventures in these dreamlands, you decide to set forth and learn the truth for yourself. But nothing could prepare you for the terrible wonders that dwell on the other side. The Dream Eaters has a unique campaign structure. And that is, instead of being an 8-part campaign like a lot of the earlier campaigns were, it is 2 4-part campaigns that you can play as a linked campaign with 2 different characters playing the different parts. And I think that's one of the great strengths of the Dream Eaters, that you can play it as an 8-scenario campaign, or you can break it up into 2 4-part campaigns. And I personally think it's stronger as the 2 4-part campaigns. The Dream Eaters has 2 incredibly interesting finales. I've seen some people describe them as very video gamey or arcadey, but I like them. Now, they're not perfect by any means, but they are interesting scenarios. And both of them present you with very novel challenges. Now, one is exceedingly hard and one's a lot easier. I'll let you figure out which one is which. The subject matter of the campaign is really neat stuff. I quite like the Dreamlands material, and it's really cool to see how they explored it here, especially in the scenario The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. The downsides for me is there's no real reason to play it as the 8-part campaign. I was expecting going into this that the successes of one side would dramatically impact the other side, but they really don't. There's very little crossover and cross-pollination between the 2 storylines. I was expecting that how well you did in scenario 1 on one side would directly impact what you had to do in scenario 1 on the other side, or scenario 2 on the other side. You know, that each of them would cross like this back and forth. And it just doesn't happen. There's a bare bit of crossover and a little bit of connected story. By and large, they are 2 4-part campaigns that are zipped together. They're not organically together. And I think that's a real letdown for me. The Dream Quest side also has possibly the worst opening scenario in all of Arkham. The first half of the scenario is terribly boring, and then the second half of the scenario is very limited. It does give out a bucket load of XP, but it's one of those cases where you don't feel like you've actually earned it. If I was ranking Arkham Horror scenarios, the first one on the Dream Quest would appear towards the bottom. If I was ranking these campaigns on their individual merits, the Dream Side campaign from the Dream Eaters would be my lowest ranked campaign. While it has an interesting finale, that finale is a little bit busted. There's some cool exploration to do in the second scenario, but the third scenario is very ordinary and the opening one is a complete dud. There's just not enough high points on the Dream Side for me to really rate it that high. The Waking Side overall is far better, and that's why it ranks above the Drowned City. The best thing about this campaign is the opening scenario on the Waking Side where you go visit a hospital. It's a really creepy scenario, and it's really tight and tense and interesting as well. I had really high hopes after that first scenario that that side was going to be really, really good. And while it's not a bad campaign by any means, it certainly goes downhill after an amazing start. I think the Dream Eaters is best looked at as a box that comes with 2 4-part campaigns. And if you're looking for shorter campaigns to play through, this is absolutely a great place to start. Most of the campaigns come in at around the 8 scenario mark, so if you want something shorter, definitely try the Dream Eaters. Deep within the icy, barren continent of Antarctica lies a secret, one so ancient and profound it threatens to tear apart our very understanding of the planet we call home. When a professor and a student finally come clean about the truth behind the tragedy of their recent expedition to the heart of Antarctica, their warning goes unheeded, and so you decide to follow in their footsteps, to venture into the frozen wilds, into deserted alien cities and across treacherous peaks, and to discover the truth that could end the world as we know it. Next up is Edge of the Earth, all about exploring Antarctica. Edge of the Earth has an extremely strong narrative, and it's hooked around the different expedition members. It's not just you and your characters on this expedition, there's 9 other people coming with you, and they all have their own story to tell. They're also very human and very frail and prone to dying, which just adds to the tension. The expedition members, combined with frost tokens and the supply items you pick up, really reinforce that you're on an expedition. And I like how this particular campaign makes you feel isolated and alone, even though you're traveling in this big group. You feel like at any moment things could get really, really bad. I like the use of monsters in this campaign. There's actually very few low-level encounters that you have. Mostly it's big, scary stuff. And that makes it feel like you're not being overrun by random cultists out in the middle of Antarctica. Every time you come across something, it's a scary something. The 2 middle scenarios in this campaign in particular are really neat, and I rate them highly. That's To the Forbidden Peaks and City of the Old Ones, I think it is. The big maps in this campaign for the first 3 scenarios and the last 2 really do make this unique. There's a whole bunch more space to explore than you normally get in a normal Arkham scenario, and I think that was a really cool thing for them to do. Now let's talk about the downsides. Now there's tons of story in Edge of the Earth, but if you're someone who doesn't like doing a lot of reading aloud, it is a lot of work, especially when you're playing through it for a 2nd or 3rd time, and you've read a bunch of the passages before. I almost feel like if you're replaying this campaign, you need to have your phone open with an app that tells you the story so everyone can just read along rather than reading it out loud. The first 3-part scenario in particular, it doesn't change enough for me. You have this giant map, and the first time you're exploring it, it's really novel, but the locations are always the same. That means you know exactly where the best shelter is the second time you play the campaign through. And I feel like that first map in particular needed more randomization to give subsequent plays a little bit more of a feeling of exploration. I don't think this is an issue with the finale because the locations are sufficiently randomized. I'd love to see a redo of the first map that does jumble up those locations or add a little bit of variety to them. I think that would add a lot to those first 3 scenarios. The best part of this campaign is To the Forbidden Peaks. In particular, it's climbing up that mountain and getting knocked all the way down it again and having to go all the way up. That sounds like a terribly frustrating experience, and it is, but it makes for a wonderful, interesting and engaging challenge. I think it's one of the top tier Arkham scenarios. I would pick this campaign up if you don't play Arkham a huge amount, but you want a campaign that is rich and has a lot of story elements to it, and that each session feels like a big deal. While I think that Edge of the Earth has some of the lowest replayability of any of the campaigns, I think its first playthrough is absolutely great. And it really would be a great pick for people who like the idea of the story and who aren't necessarily playing every week and are just blasting through the campaigns. If you're a more casual Arkham player, it's a really good box to pick up. Judgment, Temperance, Justice, The Tower. The Soothsayer's Tarot wove a tale of a grim future, hard to put out of your mind. But when you learn that 4 people have disappeared without a trace from an estate in French Hill, you begin to wonder if the cruel fate told in the tarot is meant only for you, or for the entirety of Arkham. Next up is the Circle Undone. And one of the great things about the Circle Undone is its core idea, that you're stuck between a group of witches and the Silver Twilight Lodge and their sort of magical war that they're doing. Each side is vying for power over this powerful soul, and whoever controls that powerful soul is going to determine the fate of Arkham. And I think it's a really cool framework for an Arkham campaign, putting you between those 2 groups, and letting you decide to go your own way or side with one of them. The Circle Undone is a really challenging campaign. I'd put it as one of the top 3 most difficult campaigns to beat. So if you've played a couple of other campaigns and you feel like extending, this is definitely a campaign to give a go. It's quite tough in places, and that's a good thing. I like how the campaign uses locations. A lot of the locations here are double-sided, and on one side they're in our physical world, and on the other side they're in a spiritual world, and when they flip back and forth, that changes what they do, and I think that's a really cool place to explore, and I love what they did with flipping locations in this particular campaign. On the downsides, the campaign is mechanically complex, and it has a lot of information for you to keep track of. It has a higher than average amount of treacheries that stay in play that you have to keep track of each round. So quite frequently you'll be playing through and going, oh, we've got to trigger that's going to go off, that's got to do that, and that feeds into there before you get to do anything else. It's quite busy. It's also brutally unfair at times, and not necessarily in a good way. There's a scenario called the Wages of Sin where you're trying to complete 4 different tasks. If you try to do all 4, sometimes that's virtually impossible. The scenario is just going to kick you in the teeth and you're going to fail. What you sometimes need to do with these scenarios is go, can I get away with doing 2 of them instead of 4, and then resigning? And that's a hard thing for some players to do, is to realize that no, you're not going to be able to 100% everything every time you play. And that does feel unfair, and it does feel a bit shitty. And it does feel unkind. But it is a feature, not a bug here. I definitely still count it as a negative though, because it makes those first playthroughs really nasty. The finale is also pretty bad at this. The story's also handled pretty poorly in places. Like the narrative here, once you know it and you're familiar with it, is actually really cool. But a good chunk of it gets dumped on you in like the 6th scenario. And you might actually miss that dump as well. So a lot of time you're left scratching your head going, why are we going to these places? And what's the impetus for us actually to be doing this task? The connective tissue in this campaign is pretty weak. And it makes what could have been a really strong narrative campaign just flounder a little. The best thing about the Circle Undone is the secret name scenario. It's all about rats and being nibbled on by rats and then doing a whole bunch of extra dimensional time travel, timey-wimey weirdness. It feels like a finale, even though it's only the 3rd scenario in the campaign. It's just a really well-designed, interesting, head-scratcher, epic scenario. I really dig it. I'd pick up the Circle Undone if you want a challenge and you don't mind the sort of jankiness of this campaign. I feel like the Circle Undone could ratchet way up the top of my list if it just was a little bit more polished in places. So I really do have to try the Return to the Circle Undone to see if they did that polishing. A monstrous presence once terrorized the secluded village of Dunwich. The season of horror ended only after 3 professors from Miskatonic University, Dr. Henry Armitage, Dr. Francis Morgan, and Professor Warren Rice ventured to Dunwich, armed with secret knowledge that enabled them to defeat the creature. Now, several months later, Dr. Armitage's colleagues have gone missing, and he fears the worst. The Dunwich Legacy has a great narrative hook. The Dunwich Horror is a classic Lovecraft story, and this feels like you are playing in the sequel to it. And that is great. If you're a Lovecraft fan, if you love the mythos, that is a hook that is super strong, and you'll be right there immediately. It also means the campaign takes place in really familiar settings. There's the university, there's mobsters, there's the surrounding town of Dunwich. It's all really classic, tropey Lovecraftian stuff. Overall, the scenario structures are pretty simple. In later campaigns, it can be quite convoluted setups, but in Dunwich, it tends to say, put the locations into play and start playing. And there's something to be said for a campaign that has inherent simplicity to it. That said, there are at least 3 scenarios in the Dunwich Legacy that are absolutely iconic. Now, to keep spoilers to a minimum, I'm going to say it's the train one, it's the one where people are going missing, and it's the one where time and space are going missing. Those 3 scenarios are absolute bangers, and showed just what Arkham was capable of as a game. The XP in the Dunwich Legacy is really tight as well. You'll get about a half of what you would in the Drowned City, if that. And I think that's a pro. I think in general, there's too much XP given out in Arkham. I also don't think there should have ever been cards that give you XP, but that's just me. So every time you earn an XP in the Dunwich Legacy, it feels earned, and you have to make tight, basic, sound, fundamental decks, which is really good for new players. The downsides are, it's a little unpolished in places. They were clearly still finding their legs, and some of the systems don't quite work as well as they could. There are 2 scenarios in particular, the Miskatonic Museum and Undimensional Unseen, that are generally not very well regarded by the community. In both those scenarios, I can see what they were trying to do. They just didn't quite implement it as well as they could have. I personally don't dislike the Miskatonic Museum that much, and I've grown to like Undimensional Unseen for the same reason as Wages of Sin. It's one of those ones where you're given a number of things to do a perfect run. But acknowledging that you don't always have to do a perfect run has made that scenario a lot better for me. The only scenario I think really sucks is the second to last one. It's a complete dud. And for many people, because it was the first campaign to come out, it's overplayed. I feel like a lot of the criticism directed towards the Dunwich Legacy is because familiarity breeds contempt. People have played this campaign a lot more than any of the others. And somehow that counts against it for a lot of people. I personally think it still holds up well to this day. The best thing about this campaign, though, is the finale. No Arkham campaign since has had a finale as good as the Dunwich Legacy's one. It's just a rollicking good time and shows exactly what this game is capable of doing. It blew my mind when I first played it, and to this day it's still one of my favourite scenarios. I think this campaign is still the best starter campaign, and I recommend it to anyone getting into Arkham to give the Dunwich Legacy a go. Just know that it's not without its flaws. The game was still very much young in its development at that time, but there's some great moments in there, and you shouldn't miss out on them. When renowned botanist Dr. Rosa Marquez receives a strange sample from the secluded and mysterious Hemlock Isle, her instincts tell her that something is amiss. Following the recommendation of an old colleague, she invites you to accompany her on a survey of the island. Nothing can prepare you for what you find there. Deadly, mutated wildlife and a malignant alien presence permeate the enigmatic isle. All while the local residents prepare for a festival, seemingly unaware of the danger. You have only 3 days to find out what lurks beneath Hemlock Vale before its people meet a terrible fate. The Feast of Hemlock Vale has a fantastic premise. Heading over to that island, meeting its people, and seeing the weird and wacky stuff that is going on there. And that's one of the big strengths of the campaign, is meeting the different people on the isle and getting to know them. There's some really strong and interesting characters there. And more importantly, you get to interact with these characters at different scenarios. So knowing what people are up to can really change a scenario, because you can pick what day you go there. And that's another strength of this campaign, is its unique structure. There are 3 days and 3 nights. And there's a default scenario on every night, but you can go do any of the other scenarios on that night as well. And during the day, you can pick one of the 5 normal scenarios and go there. And depending on what day you pick, different people might be there. And that, of course, changes their story. The overall quality of scenarios in Hemlock Vale is extremely high. There isn't a single scenario in here I would consider a dud, with the possible exception of the finale. And there are an awful lot of good ones. I'm a big fan of the one where you go for a walk on the beach, the one where you're in a mining cart, and the one where you're looking after a barn at night. Those 3 are absolute bangers. The downside for me is mostly the preludes. This might be a top 3 campaign for me if it didn't have the busy work of the preludes. Now these are sort of a mini game that happens before you actually start playing, where you move around the board and interact with people. And I find it to be insane amounts of busy work. It could have just been reading passages from the book, but what it becomes is reading passages from the book, but with more busy work involved, and then you have to reset that and then set up the scenario. It also had this curious effect where, because of the preludes, you could set up perfectly for the day scenarios. The day scenarios are the easy ones, the night scenarios are hard. So it meant that the difficulty of the campaign oscillates between really easy day scenario and really hard night scenario. So it's like easy, hard, easy, hard, easy, hard. And I found the day scenario sometimes could be a little bit of a cakewalk. And I don't think that's a good thing, that you get to prepare for the easier scenarios, but you don't get to prepare for the hard ones. It makes what could be amazing scenarios into too easy a time for me. I also say the finale is completely and utterly over-engineered. It has a prelude, and then it has a changeover of the map as well. So you're essentially doing 3 maps in one session. It is one of the longest scenarios I've ever played as well. It just took forever to get through. I think if they'd split it up into 2 scenarios, it might have been a lot better. So while every other scenario in this campaign is good to great, the finale really does let it down. The best thing about this campaign is its unique structure. I love that you can pick and choose where you go and what characters you're going to be chasing down. I think that adds a ton of replay to this campaign. I recommend the Feast of Hemlock Vale to anyone who just wants one campaign with a ton of replayability in it. If you like the combination of quite a bit of story and a lot of gameplay, it's a really good mix of those 2. And as I say, it's about this far away from being a top 3 campaign for me. Strange disappearances haunt the city of Arkham, Massachusetts. With each object, each building, each person that vanishes, they are erased not just from physical existence, but from history and memory as well. Only you remember, or so you believe. Soon your investigation unravels into an international conspiracy. You are recruited by a shadowy government agency whose sole purpose is a collection and research of paradimensional implements they call keys. However, you are not the only ones after them. This will probably be my most controversial ranking, putting the Scarlet Keys this high, because a lot of people don't like it. I think it's neato. The first and foremost reason I think it's neato is I love the campaign structure. I love that you start off in London, you're given a map, you're given a dossier and told, Go do what you want to do. There are bad people out there, there's things happening, you decide what you want to interact with. The campaign comes with more scenarios than normal, so it's got 10 scenarios, but it also allows you to plug in any of the standalone scenarios. Now you can do that in any other campaign, but it makes little sense to stop your exploration of Antarctica to teleport back to Monte Carlo to go to the casino, and then back to Antarctica. It's just a jarring ludonarrative dissonance. Whereas with the Scarlet Keys, you actually travel to the location and then do the standalone where it is. It's part of the traveling around the board. And I think that's cool. It means you can slot in any scenarios. You can slot in fan scenarios if you wanted. And they will always fit into this campaign. I also really like one of the core campaign mechanics of the hidden cards. I found dealing with those hidden cards and trying to track them down a really interesting and engaging part of the Scarlet Keys. And I just dig the theme. I love the whole X-Files but 1920s Cthulhu vibe that it has going on. And I also love the coterie and the keys. Like, there's some really cool novel ideas in here. This is the campaign that feels like the least Lovecraftian, but in a good way. This is all like original character stuff that the Arkham people made up. And it was good to see them stretch their legs and try to do something creative. The downside is, the scenario quality in the Scarlet Keys is pretty average. There's not a lot of really jump out, stand out, amazing scenarios here, and there are a few that people do not care for at all. The same thing I said about Wages of Sin applies to Shades of Suffering as well. That's a brutal scenario. But there are some really fun ones. The cool thing is, you can just skip the ones you don't want to do. You can't do that in any other campaign. Of course, the finale is terrible, and that is a recurring theme. This one in particular, it's got quite a convoluted intro, and then it's just a bit of a naff exploration of the core mechanics. I could have done a little more for the finale for me here. There's also tons of reading, which I know is a negative for a bunch of people. The Scarlet Keys is like a pick-a-path book, but at various points you play an Arkham horror campaign, and that structure is not for everyone. I like it personally, but I know it's a big downside for a ton of people out there. The best thing in this campaign for me are the different coterie members. I love meeting all of them and seeing how different and varied they were. I just wish they popped up a bit more. I absolutely recommend the Scarlet Keys to people who want variety in their campaigns. If you own all the Arkham stuff, or you want to own all the Arkham stuff, the Scarlet Keys is really good for getting those standalone scenarios played in a campaign context. It's also great for people who like playing standalone fan scenarios. We think we know the history of the Earth, but there are secrets that lie beyond our ken and truths that threaten to undo our understanding of the universe. When renowned historian Alejandro Vela discovers one of these secrets, the ruins of an ancient and forgotten Aztec city, it sets into motion a plot that could unravel the very fabric of time itself. The Forgotten Age is the last campaign I played through, and as a result, it's one I haven't done multiple playthroughs of yet. What I will say for it, though, is it's brutal. It is really, really, really difficult. And that's a pro. This campaign is an absolute challenge, and I was reveling in how much of a challenge it was. To put it in perspective, we'd just finished the Drowned City beforehand, and I was feeling a little flat on Arkham Horror the card game. And I was thinking to myself, you know, maybe I'm burned out on this game. Maybe I've played it a little bit too much. And then we played through the Forgotten Age, and I'm excited about the game again. I was like, nope, it's not me, it was the Drowned City. This is great. Not only is it a very difficult campaign, the story also goes to weird, wonderful, and wacky places. If you're a big fan of the Lovecraft mythos, there'll be a whole bunch of fun things you'll come across in here and go, oh wow, that's a really cool way to do that. It looks like you're just going to go off into the jungle and that's it. You're going to be exploring the jungle for the whole campaign. But that's really only a small part of this campaign. There's a whole bunch more you do. Really interesting things. The campaign also has some absolute stone-cold classic scenarios. The Depths of Yoth and Threads of Fate are two of the best scenarios I've ever played, and at the end of playing each one of those, I was absolutely fizzing. I thought they were a really great time. I'd love to replay those scenarios a lot more. The campaign also punishes you hard. It hands out trauma. It also hands out a lot of XP, but this time it feels earned. Your characters feel like they've been through something, like they've seen some stuff, and they've grown wise from it. But they're also carrying a whole bunch of trauma and a whole bunch of old wounds. And I love that about this campaign. I actually think more campaigns should be throwing trauma at you more often. It's something they seem to ease off in later campaigns, maybe because it was a feel-bad moment. For me, it adds to the challenge and it adds to the drama. The downsides of the Forgotten Age are it's crazy unfair in places. Like the opening scenario can just be brutally horrible, and we came so close to losing it. As it was, we only had one character standing at the end of that opening scenario, and 2 people who were down and poisoned. It was a brutal time. The other thing is the supplies mechanic is a little rough the first time you go through, because you have no idea what's good. And you can end up getting a ton of trauma and really disadvantaged scenarios because of what you picked. The same is true for the exploration mechanic, which can just kick you in the teeth sometimes. And then there's scenarios like the Boundary Beyond that just feel brutally unfair and unkind. The best thing in this campaign is the first time you reveal a particular recurring enemy and you look at its stat line and go, oh my god, we're doomed. There are so many scary fights in this campaign, and they come at you almost immediately. I do not recommend The Forgotten Age to anyone as their first campaign. It is kind of brutal. I definitely recommend to people who've played a fair bit of Arkham and want that extra challenge. In the shadowy, decrepit seaport of Innsmouth, a tangled scheme begins to unravel. A government agent goes missing. Strange creatures are sighted by the reef along the coastline. Celestial bodies align, and caught in the centre of this conspiracy, several outsiders awaken in a deadly pit with no memory of how they got there or how to escape. There are only 2 campaigns to go, and the Innsmouth Conspiracy is my second favourite campaign. It's a sequel to my favourite Lovecraft story, The Shadow over Innsmouth. I love Innsmouth, the dreary little town and its evil fish-eyed people. I think it's one of the greatest things in the whole Lovecraftian mythos. And I was really excited to play through the campaign because of the theme, and it delivered. It gave me a ton of the fishy Innsmouth experience. The first 6 scenarios of this campaign are absolute bangers. At the end of scenario 6, I was thinking this was going to be my favourite campaign of all time. I'd had a whale of a time up to that point. Scenario 1 is the best opening scenario of any campaign, and I'll fight anyone on that. I think it is a great opener. It's immediately tense and scary. Scenario 3 and Scenario 6 are right up there of all-time great scenarios in Arkham as well. And I personally also really enjoy Scenarios 2 and 4, and 5 has kind of grown on me. As a 6-scenario campaign, it's amazing. The deep ones are a really cool adversary set, because every time they engage you, they do something negative to you. So you have to keep coming up with ways to keep them at arm's length. You don't necessarily want to be engaging them every time you fight. And that adds an extra wrinkle to every fight you have in the Innsmouth Conspiracy. It's just you don't even want to engage the deep ones. The best thing about this is it leads to a lot more friendly fire in the campaign, and I think that's aces. I also really enjoy the tidal tunnels and the flood markers. So flood markers are a way that the environment changes and becomes more dangerous as the scenario progresses, and the tidal tunnels allow an element of randomness in the location layouts. I think both these things add a lot to Innsmouth as a campaign. My downside is, obviously, the 7th and 8th scenarios are not great. I think by the time you get into the 7th and 8th scenarios, the tidal tunnels and the flood markers have played themselves out a little, and they lean into them far too much. The campaign needs a little bit more variety at the end. It needed a bit of a tonal shift, and you just don't get that. It's a bit more of the same, but not as good. There's also an interesting thing about the campaign structure where some scenarios are happening in the past, so you get your XP withheld until you return to the present. That's a cool idea and all, but I don't necessarily think they needed to withhold the XP from you. It does mean you go through like the first 4 scenarios with very little XP, and then you start getting a dump of it like about scenario 5 or 6, which makes the XP in this campaign feel very uneven and weird. And yeah, what's holding it back is the campaign needs just that little bit more variety. I love the tidal tunnels, I love the flood tokens, I didn't need to see them all the time. The best thing about this campaign is when you get back to Innsmouth for the first time and see what happens. You know, it's just a simple walk through town, isn't it? Right? I recommend this campaign to practically anyone. I don't think it's too complex and I don't think it's too difficult, so I think it would be good for new players. And despite my issues with the last 2 scenarios, those first 6 are so good. And it just has a really tight, purely Lovecraftian theme. So yeah, this is a very broad endorsement for this one. For weeks, the upcoming performance of The King in Yellow has been the talk of the town. But after researching the play's dark history, you are convinced something foul is at work. Disappearances, suicides, delusions, insanity. Wherever The King in Yellow is performed, madness follows close behind. No connection has yet been proven, but that won't stop you from searching for the truth. Me and my friends played through a Call of Cthulhu campaign called The Tatters of the King. It was a very, very long campaign, and we played that for 2 years. So I really like the whole King in Yellow, Carcosa, Hastur, that whole shebang. So the theme for the Path to Carcosa was a really big deal for me. It also has this cool core mechanic of conviction and doubt. Story elements are presented in a way that you can believe in them, or you can choose to doubt what your eyes are telling you. The campaign actively messes with you in that regard. And depending on whether you believe what you're seeing or whether you doubt what you're seeing, it also changes how the campaign's scenarios play out. The campaign does mess with you. It's very meta in places. There's little things written on cards, way things are phrased, that leave you second guessing what you're doing in the campaign. It plants a seed of doubt in you as a player, and I think that's really neat, and none of the other campaigns mess with you to the same degree. As part of that messing with you, it also included hidden cards for the first time, which were cards that would be added to your hand that would change your behaviour, and you couldn't talk about them. And that's a wonderful thing to add to a cooperative game. Mistrust. I also like the recurring villain in this. They would turn up in most of the scenarios and you had to deal with them in some way. It created a nice beat that went through the whole story of this masked figure that's always there, and you have to figure out what they're up to. It's another little way of adding tension to the scenarios in a way that makes sense. And the big thing for the path to Carcosa is practically every scenario is great. There's one scenario I would consider average and everything else is good to amazing. And it probably has 4 of the top 10 scenarios in all of Arkham Horror. And those scenarios for me are 2, 4, 5, and 6. Those scenarios are all fantastic top tier scenarios. The intro one's pretty good, and even the finale is not bad compared to others. It's a solid finale. The downsides of this campaign are relatively few. It punishes sanity loss quite a bit, which is something you have to take into account, but that's just a mechanical thing. If you go in blind with a character with low will and 5 or 6 sanity, this can be a very hard campaign, but overall that's not a biggie. And as I said, scenario 3 is kind of mid, but it's not that big a deal. Yeah, I don't think there's an awful lot of cons for the path to Carcosa. I have a hard time finding negative things to say about it. It's just a really, really good campaign, almost top to bottom. The best thing about this campaign is the party. The first time you see a guest do something weird, and in the aftermath of the party when you come back after running away. It's so cool how this campaign just messes with you. And yeah, I would recommend this campaign to absolutely everyone. Maybe not as your first campaign, but definitely as your second. And there you have it. Those are my final campaign rankings for Arkham Horror the card game. From here on in, we go into a new era with new campaigns that are going to be 3 to 5 scenarios long on average, it seems. So they're going to be very different things to compare and contrast to the old campaign boxes. I feel like it's a good time to just underwrite this whole campaign series and just give my thoughts on them right now, just as I've finished playing through all of them. From here, I'm going to do some more Arkham ranking videos, including ranking all the characters and hopefully all of the scenarios. I'll need to play through the Forgotten Age another time before I do that one. If you want to find out more information about Arkham Horror the card game, definitely go check out Playing Board Games. Justin and the team over there have the greatest amount of resources for Arkham Horror the card game. And a reminder that 3 Minute Board Games does not do paid content. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. I got a review copy of the core set of Arkham Horror, but everything else has come out of our pocket. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.